We should not look at a teacher and say, "Oh wow, he or she can teach." Rather, we must look at a teacher and say, "Oh my, how inspiring and compassionate he or she is." Good morning. My name is Hend Moubayed, and I'll be talking about the topic of improving teacher quality. I truly believe that teachers should aim to have a certain quality that will not only reach student outcomes, but help produce active citizens for our future. So what is teacher quality? According to Ball, a teacher is ought to think intellectually and to have a self-reflection on how to transform one's teaching approach. So why is it an issue? According to Boone, the quality of teaching has turned out to be a major matter in Australian society. That's because teacher quality leads to upgrading student achievements and enable them to obtain better results. Therefore, it is crucial for teachers to change the way they teach and create new teaching approaches that override the traditional method. To begin, we will take a brief look at the traditional teaching approaches to understand how it has affected teacher quality. So let's look at high-stakes testing. Take, for example, NAPLAN. The majority of teachers consider NAPLAN as an inappropriate testing mechanism, as it requires teachers to focus more on a spoon-feeding process for their students to maximize their mark, rather than concentrating on delivering a quality of teaching. For example, teachers do their best to teach students how to answer multiple choice questions and how to use the given time to answer the whole NAPLAN paper. As you can see, this leads students into more of a systematic, boring and dull lesson where it will be very predictable for them each and every lesson. For example, a teacher might say to his or her students, "Class, you will not need to know about this concept because it will not be in the exam." Hence, students begin to think that because they will not be tested for it, therefore they don't need to know it. However, this must not be the case, whereby learning should be a process of exploration and not just for testing. Then you've got teacher-centered learning. This is where the teacher becomes the center of learning and does not allow the learner to be in charge of his or her learning journey. It leads to only the teacher giving instruction and allows less time for students to be innovative or participate in group activities. Thus, that leads to also having the student's outcome reduced. You may ask, how has the traditional approach affected teacher quality? According to research, many teachers have diverted away from what they have learned at universities, where only 95% of them have changed their behaviors, and 60% of them have changed the way they give their teaching instructions. You may ask why? This is because teachers are pressured to spend more time on preparing students for tests more than demonstrating an effective teaching approach that will help students become active citizens. The issue with traditional teaching approach is that it deprives students to be motivated to learn. That's because most of the term they're not participating, they're passively listening to the teacher and not being a part of their learning journey. The traditional teaching approach does not enable students to be critical thinkers and be able to solve problems. Not only does it affect students, but teachers too, where they will always feel pressured into a teaching method that they do not feel comfortable with. So pause this video for a second and think. If teachers continue to use the traditional approach within the classroom, will students become reliant on others when they grow up? Would their energy for learning reduce in the future? Now that's something to think about. Now it's time to see the link between teacher quality and the concept of ethics. Many may ask how the quality of teaching can be tested. This is sometimes tested through tertiary qualifications, looking at students' progress and achievement, looking at the personality of the individual, and based on that, the candidate is chosen. However, this has raised ethical issues in teaching. So, how is it related to ethics? So, Thompson and Harbour, they argue that it is difficult to measure properly teacher quality. It is true that teachers are only selected after a rigorous process. However, will this process ensure that the teacher's teaching quality has been verified and tested well? It will be problematic if teachers are accepted into the field without having the required skills, ethical manners, and motivation to increase student outcomes. A teacher is ought to cope with psychological and personal scenarios and not just have a basic knowledge of teaching. The matter of democracy. First, we must understand what is democracy. Democracy is the mechanism that allows individuals to have the right to decide whatever he or she thinks is an appropriate course of action. If teachers are not free to decide the right teaching approach due to existing school policies, then their teaching quality will be affected greatly. According to Ken et al., acknowledges the existence of undemocratic practices in the Australian schooling sector. In relation to my personal experience, as a preschool teacher, I had to observe educational policies and numerous standards that clearly undermine the right for teachers to be free to use whatever teaching approach. I felt in my classroom that the students were actually bored of me talking all the time. They had to just look at me, and whatever I wrote on the board, they had to copy. So that led to a lack of motivation. Some of the students didn't want to work anymore. There was no concentration whatsoever, and they were like robots following exactly what I had to do and nothing else. It's also negative for the teacher, because if teachers don't have the democracy to choose what type of method to use in the classroom, then they themselves will not have the freedom to teach the way they want to. And the teacher is the only one that knows its students. So by knowing our students, we know what methods to use to meet their needs and interests. But if we are restricted in our classroom, then definitely student outcome will not be reached. Improving teachers' effectiveness. We have learned in this course that teachers need to bring new change to the educational systems. So as you can see here on the screen, to your right, you've got the students sitting next to each other and teacher facing towards them. This is more of a systematic approach. It becomes boring, dull. Students don't come together and speak to one another. It's just listening to the teacher passively all the time. On your left-hand side, you can see the teacher in the middle, and you've got the students all around. They're in a group, they're in a circle, they're talking to each other, they're communicating with one another, they're sharing ideas, and the teacher is talking less, participating more, going around the students, and this is what real teaching is. It's less dull, less boring, more motivating, and that's what's going to reach students' outcomes as well. Then you've got eliminate high-stakes testing. High-stakes testing is a negative approach. It should be removed, and according to Ball, it is well known that the NAPLAN test does not give a true image of students' abilities and skills. We must raise the bar as well. Recruiters should select new teachers based on their personal skills and not only focus on their educational qualifications. A most recent strategy that universities has implemented is the CASPER test. This aims to assess how pre-service teachers think, act and decide in certain ethical situations. Questions like, what would you do if your friend in a group assignment said that he was sick, but later that day you saw him in the shopping center with some friends? How will you approach him? These questions are constructed in a way that helps the assessor see how the teacher will deal with certain situations within the classroom. Also, another strategy includes the testing of numeracy and literacy skills to make sure that teachers are able to teach effectively. Also, in the USA, the Federal Ministry of Education has recruited teachers of high caliber. This includes displaying unteachable values that help teachers to be effective, and this has proved to be a success according to the New South Wales Standards Authority. To conclude, the findings suggest that teachers need to overcome restrictions that are imposed on them, and they need to consider more democratic and ethical issues in education. Research has shown that teachers can adopt new teaching approaches that will enhance teachers' effectiveness. The Department of Education needs to remove high-stakes testing such as NAPLAN and must raise the standards in hiring only qualified and skilled teachers. As teachers, we need to pursue a great sense of ethics and democracy. Finally, it is worth remembering the words of William Ward as he states, "The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, but only the great teacher inspires." Thank you for listening to this presentation.